For anyone who's ever, been in a conversation and felt like there was something else going on, like what someone said wasn't quite the whole story.
Oh, absolutely. That feeling of a hidden message just under the surface.
Exactly. It's not always about the literal words, is it? It's often about what's implied. Today in a deep dive, we're diving into something fascinating related to that. We're going to explore these things called implicatures,
Oh.
basically, those implied meanings that add so much depth to language.
Right.
And here's where it gets really interesting. We're looking at how they pop up in, of all places, fourth grade student textbooks from Indonesia.
That's a unique angle.
Yeah. So our mission today is to unpack how these hidden meanings appear in those books, why they might be there, and what that tells us about the subtle art of how we all communicate,
And understanding these implied layers, it's just so vital, not just for kids learning language, obviously, but, for all of us trying to navigate complex social stuff.
like everyday life.
Pretty much. Whether it's work or just chatting with friends, grasping the implied versus just the said. Well, that's key to better connection, fewer misunderstandings.
Okay.
And we'll be using the work of the philosopher Grice as a kind of guide. His ideas give us a really useful framework for spotting and understanding these implied meanings.
Great. So let's start right there. What exactly is an implicature? Can we define that simply?
Well, linguist named Yule put it nicely. He said it's information that conveys additional meaning than just words.
Additional meaning. Okay.
Think about it like this. If you say, wow, it's getting chilly in here, you're probably not just stating the temperature, right?
Right. I probably want someone to close the window or
Yeah,
something.
exactly. You might be implying that. The word implicature itself comes from to imply, which kind of means to wrap up or hide something. It's that hidden layer.
Got it. That makes sense. It's the stuff we read between the lines.
Precisely. And it's a really core part of pragmatics. That's the study of how we use language in actual context, in real situations.
Pragmatics. Okay.
Yeah, and implicature helps explain why we sometimes misunderstand each other. Because, the literal words don't always match the intended message. There's often more going on.
And the really unique thing about this study we're looking at today is how researchers tracked this in dialogues within elementary school books, fourth grade.
Yeah, seeing these complex linguistic ideas playing out in materials for young learners is quite revealing.
Okay, so we know what an implicature is,
Yeah,
but you mentioned Grice identified different types.
that's right. He made a key distinction between two main types: conventional implicatures and conversational implicatures.
Let's tackle the first one then. Conventional implicatures. What sets them apart?
Okay, so conventional implicatures are interesting because they don't really depend on the specific back and forth of a conversation. They're sort of built into certain words or phrases themselves.
Okay, and how does that work?
When you use these specific words, they just naturally carry an extra implied meaning. It's like part of the word's definition almost, but not quite the literal meaning. It's baggage the word carries.
Okay. Can you give an example? That sounds a bit abstract.
Sure, think about words like but or even. If I say he's incredibly smart, but he can be lazy, the word but itself carries this conventional implication of contrast, maybe even a negative slant on the laziness compared to the smartness.
Right, but signals a turn.
Exactly. Or even Sarah finished the marathon. Using even implies that Sarah was maybe the least likely person you'd expect to finish. It suggests surprise or low expectation. That meaning comes from the word even itself, not the whole context.
I see. It's tied directly to the word choice. Okay, so here's an example from those Indonesian textbooks. Ingat ka kamu tentang rumah-rumah ibadah di Indonesia. Tentu kamu telah mempelajari bagaimana umat beragama tersebut menggunakannya.
Right, which translates roughly
Do
to,
you remember the houses of worship in Indonesia? Of course, you have learned how religious people use them. Now, the key word is menggunakannya, or using it.
Hmm.
The study points out that this word carries the conventional implicature of how people worship according to their religions, even though the word worship isn't explicitly used. It's implied by use them in this specific context of houses of worship.
that's a perfect example. The word choice inherently suggests the act of worship there. And the research actually found 12 of these conventional implicatures in the books, 4 in one theme, 8 in another. They're consistent word-driven implications.
Okay, so that's conventional, tied to the words. What about the other type? Conversational implicatures. You said this is where it gets really interesting.
Yeah, conversational implicatures are fascinating because they arise when it looks like someone is breaking the normal rules of conversation, but they're doing it on purpose to imply something else.
Breaking the rules. Like how?
Well, Grice outlined some characteristics. First, these implicatures can often be canceled.
Canceled, you mean taken back?
Sort of. Imagine I say, Bill is a fine friend. That might imply he's okay, but maybe not great. But then I could add, in fact, he's the best friend I've ever had. See? The second part cancels the lukewarm implication of the first part.
Okay, interesting. So they're flexible. What else?
Second, there usually isn't another way to phrase it exactly the same way and keep that specific implication. Third, you need to know the literal meaning of the words, but the implication itself isn't part of that literal meaning.
Right.
And fourth, this is key, their truth isn't about whether the statement itself is true, but about the act of saying it in that situation.
The action of saying it. Okay, unpack that.
Right, so the meaning isn't just in the words, it's in why the speaker chose those words right then. If I ask you, want to grab coffee later, and you say, I have a huge deadline looming.
I'm implying I can't go.
Exactly. The action of giving that reason, even though it doesn't explicitly say no, implies you're busy. The meaning comes from your choice of utterance in response to my question.
That makes total sense. It happens all the time. Which brings us nicely to another big idea from Grice you mentioned. The cooperative principle. This is the idea, right, that when we talk, we generally try to cooperate. We try to be clear, give the right amount of info, stay relevant, be understood, like an unwritten agreement.
Absolutely.
Right.
Grace broke this down into 4 guidelines or maxims. First is the maxim of quantity. Basically, give the information needed, but not more and not less.
Don't overshare or be too brief.
Exactly. If I ask, what did you have for lunch? And you just say food, you've given too little. If you list every ingredient and its origin, probably too much.
Okay. Quantity. What's next?
The maxim of quality. This is about truthfulness. Try to say what you believe to be true, and don't say things you lack evidence for.
So don't lie, basically, or guess wildly.
Pretty much. Then there's the maxim of relevance. Stick to the topic. Make your contribution relevant to the current exchange.
Stay on point.
Yeah. Although sometimes, like in that deadline example, something that seems irrelevant on the surface is actually implicitly relevant because of shared knowledge.
Ah, okay. Good point. And the last one.
The maxim of manner. This is about how you say things. Be clear, be brief, be orderly, and avoid obscurity or ambiguity. Don't be deliberately confusing.
Be easy to understand. Okay, quantity, quality, relevance, manner. Got it. So if these are the rules for cooperating in conversation, why would anyone break them? Especially in a textbook trying to teach kids. It seems like you'd want maximum clarity.
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the answer often lies in another principle proposed by a linguist named Leach, the politeness principle.
Politeness. Okay, that makes intuitive sense.
Yeah. Sometimes being polite is actually more important in a social interaction than strictly following Grace's maxims. Leach outlined several politeness maxims, too. For example, the tact maxim.
Tact, like being diplomatic.
Exactly. It's about minimizing cost or loss to the other person and maximizing benefit to them. This often leads to more indirect speech, saying, could you possibly pass the salt? Is more tactful, more polite than just barking past the salt, even though the direct command is clearer and follows manner better.
So being indirect, maybe breaking quantity or manner, can actually be more polite.
Precisely. There's also the generosity, maximize respect for others, minimize praise of self. The acceptance maxim, sometimes called appropriation, maximize cost to self, minimize benefit to self, like offering to do a difficult task yourself.
Right, taking one for the team.
And the modesty maxim, minimize praise of self, maximize dispraise of self, like downplaying a compliment someone gives you.
Oh, okay. I see how those work.
So these politeness goals often clash with the goal of pure, efficient information exchange described by Grice.
And that's the aha moment. The study found characters breaking the cooperative principle, specifically because they were trying to follow these politeness principles.
Exactly. The apparent violations weren't communication breakdowns. They were socially motivated choices.
It's like navigating social rules sometimes means bending the communication rules. So when someone's being a bit vague or talking around a point, maybe they're just trying really hard to be polite.
Often, yes. It shows that communication isn't just about transmitting data. It's about managing relationships.
Okay, let's bring this back to the textbooks. Theme 6, My Ideals, and Theme 9, My Country's Wealth. How did these conversational implicatures actually show up?
Well, the study found 15 instances overall, 7 in the first theme, 8 in the second. And the most common violation, happening 8 times, was of the maxim of quantity.
Giving too much or too little information. And this was linked to politeness.
Yes. Often giving more information than strictly necessary was seen as more polite or considerate.
Okay, like the example from the book. Udin asks Lani, Benarka, apatita mo, Lani. Is that right? What are your aspirations, Lani? And Lani says, Aku senang dengan hewan. Aku ingin suatu hari nanti bisa menjadi dokter hewan agar aku dapat bantu hewan-hewan yang sakit dan butuh pertolongan. Which is, I love animals. I want to be a veterinarian someday so I can help sick animals that need help.
Right. She could have just said veterinarian. That falls quantity.
But she gave this longer answer. The study suggests she did this because just saying veterinarian might feel too blunt, too brief, impolite. So she elaborated, violating quantity but upholding the tact maxim, perhaps, being more engaging.
Exactly. Providing that extra context and reasoning makes the answer feel warmer, more considered.
Okay, so quantity was the big one. What about the others?
The maxim of quality truthfulness was violated 6 times. Think of maybe gentle white lies or evasive answers.
Like saying, that's interesting instead of, that's terrible.
Precisely that kind of thing, often done to uphold generosity or tact not wanting to hurt someone's feelings. And the maxim of relevance was violated only twice.
Staying on topic. How did that happen?
It could be like changing the subject subtly to avoid an awkward topic, maybe prioritizing tact or even modesty. Like if asked about an achievement, someone might deflect by talking about something else. But again, even these irrelevant comments are usually understandable because of the shared context.
Which brings us perfectly to the final piece. Context. How does context make all these implicatures, these violations, actually work? Without it, wouldn't we just be lost?
Completely lost. Context is everything here. It's the shared background knowledge, the environment, who's talking to whom, why they're talking, that allows speakers and listeners to interpret the intended meaning beyond the literal words.
It's the stage on which the play happens.
A great analogy. And the study highlighted that in these textbooks, the context was usually very clear. The theme titles themselves, My Ideals, My Country's Wealth, set the stage.
Right, so the conversations about aspirations in Theme 6 or about national resources in Theme 9 provided the necessary background for the kids reading it.
Exactly. That shared context between the characters, which the student reader also shares by understanding the theme, is what makes the implicit meanings accessible. It allows the student to figure out why Lani gave the long answer or why someone might have been slightly evasive.
So the context acts like a key, unlocking the implied meaning.
Absolutely essential. Without that common ground, the implicatures just wouldn't land. Communication would break down.
Wow. Okay, so we've journeyed from just words to these hidden meanings, implicatures. We looked at Grice's ideas about cooperation, Leach's about politeness, and saw how they interact, often leading to these violations that are actually sophisticated social moves. And we saw this playing out even in 4th grade textbooks, all underpinned by the crucial role of shared context. It really shows that implicatures aren't just some obscure linguistic footnote. They're absolutely central to how we connect and understand each other.
They really are. It highlights how much of communication is beneath the surface, relying on inference and shared understanding.
So maybe a final thought for you listening.
Yeah, think about this. Next time you're talking to someone, or even reading an email or a text, try to notice what's not being said explicitly.
What's implied?
Exactly. How much are you relying on that shared context or picking up on politeness cues to get the real message? Which of Grice's maxims might have been bent or broken and why? What unspoken understanding made it all work?
It makes you realize just how much complex calculation goes into even simple conversations.
It really does. How much is literal and how much is just beautifully implicitly understood? Makes you think.